That morning in Maplewood, Ohio, everything seemed untouched by trouble. Birds filled the air with their songs, dew clung like tiny jewels to the grass, and the Hudson River shimmered softly under the rising sun. But beneath that calm surface, like cracks hidden beneath fresh paint, lay a secret so dark it would soon tear apart an entire family. A man admired as wise and gentle, the one people thought they could trust, had concealed the unthinkable. He had been carrying on an affair with his own daughter-in-law. It was a sin buried in silence, but silence has a way of rotting from within. On a night when a family should have been safe under one roof, fate turned cruel. The man's wife, who was also the mother-in-law of the young woman, stumbled upon the forbidden truth. The discovery struck like lightning through dry timber, and what followed burned everything in its path: rage, heartbreak, and betrayal. By the end of that night, blood had been spilled. The father-in-law was dead, his body discarded into the quiet river, the Hudson becoming a silent witness, carrying the weight of a deadly secret beneath its surface. Today we'll retrace that chilling path, how a hidden sin grew like poison in the dark, how its exposure shattered everything, and how one desperate choice sealed an irreversible fate. This isn't just a story of crime, it's a mirror reflecting trust broken, bonds betrayed, and the heavy price of human weakness. On the morning of August 25, 2021, Fairview, Ohio, still wore a veil of mist. The dry season had thinned the Hudson River, bearing patches of sand and wild grass along its edges. Then came the faint, steady sound of oars cutting water, like a heartbeat breaking the silence. The man at the oars was Mr. Harris, a ferryman whose life had been tied to the river for decades. He was over 60 now, his skin weathered by the sun, his frame lean but still tough, his hands roughened by endless years of work. To the villagers, he was as much a part of the river as the current itself. As long as Mr. Harris rows, the Hudson will never fall silent, they often said. That morning, he was carrying a bundle of firewood across, intending to sell it at the small market near Lincoln Highway. But as his boat slid past a bend choked with reeds, he stopped abruptly. A smell, foul, unnatural, cut through the morning air. It wasn't mud or dead fish. It was heavier, like rot that clings to the skin. Mr. Harris's instincts, sharpened like a knife over years on the river, told him to be cautious. Scanning the shoreline, he saw it, a sack floating half-submerged among the reeds. It was a woven plastic sack, green and white, swollen as though something inside pressed against its walls. Waterlogged yet heavy. At first, he thought it might be animal remains. Villagers sometimes dumped carcasses to avoid burying them. If it is, I'll still have to pull it out, he muttered. The river doesn't deserve to choke on this. Knowing he couldn't manage alone, he called to Jason Miller, a strong young man cutting grass nearby. Jason hurried over, and together they cut a bamboo pole, hooking the sack and dragging it onto the bank under the shade of an old tree. It was heavier than they imagined, dragging it like dragging a nightmare onto dry land. But once it was on the grass, both men froze. The shape inside wasn't whole like livestock. There were strange contours, unnatural bulges. Jason's heartbeat thundered in his ears. "Mr. Harris, we have to open it," he whispered, though fear cracked his voice. Mr. Harris, his jaw tight, gave a slow nod. His weathered hands reached for the nylon rope knotted at the top. The cord was worn but tightly bound. Slowly he pulled the last knot loose. The sack's mouth gaped open and a wave of stench exploded outward. Jason stumbled back, his face drained of all color. "Oh God," he gasped. Mr. Harris's body shook uncontrollably, as if the ground had turned to ice beneath his feet. Strands of long, wet black hair slithered out first, clinging to what lay inside. Then came the sight that would haunt them forever. A swollen face, half decayed, eyes closed as if still keeping secrets even in death. It was a woman's body. The river breeze stirred the reeds, whispering through them like voices of the dead. Jason wept softly, his chest heaving, while sweat trickled down Mr. Harris's temple. In all his years he had seen the river give back many things, but never something this dreadful. Hands trembling, he fumbled for his old phone and dialed the village head. "Mr. Collins, there's a body in the river. Call the police." "Hurry," he whispered, his voice quaking. By midday, the shadow of this discovery spread across Maplewood. What began as a quiet morning had turned into a day that no one in the village would ever forget. Villagers crowded along the Hudson River's edge, their whispers rising like wind through dry leaves. Who is she? Why stuffed in a sack? Was it murder? The questions hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. Mr. Harris stood apart, his eyes fixed on the swollen sack as though it carried more than just death. It carried an omen. Deep down, he knew Maplewood's fragile peace had just cracked. A shadow had risen from the water, ready to consume the quiet life the town had always known. The morning mist still lingered on the Hudson when the shrill sound of sirens cut through Fairview's silence. Less than an hour after Mr. Harris's call, patrol cars from the Fairview Police Department arrived. The murmuring crowd fell quiet as yellow police tape went up and officers forced everyone back. From one of the cars stepped Captain Mark Reynolds, sharp-eyed and commanding. "Secure the scene. No one crosses the line." "Everyone step back," he barked. Some villagers pinched their noses, gagging from the rancid smell. Minutes later, a white van pulled up, the Ohio State Forensics Lab team from Columbus, clad in protective suits, gloves and cameras. Detective Sarah Mitchell approached Reynolds briskly. "Captain, we'll start processing," she said with clipped urgency. Every inch of the scene was documented. The sack's distance from the river, its angle under the old tree, the type of mud smeared on its sides. The green and white woven sack was photographed, measured, and the frayed blue rope binding it was snipped and bagged as evidence. When the sack was pried open, the crowd fell silent. Inside was the swollen body of a woman, her long tangled hair clinging to her decayed face. The smell was unbearable. Some officers stepped back to retch. Around 55 years old, height approximately 155 centimeters, floral dress faded from wear, an officer recorded. Detective Mitchell crouched low, studying the woman's head. Significant bruising on the left cheek and forehead. Jaw appears fractured. No sharp force injuries. She was killed before being discarded, she concluded coldly. Captain Reynolds turned to Mr. Harris and Jason Miller, seated at the roadside, still pale from the shock. "Did either of you see who left this here?" he asked. Mr. Harris shook his head, voice hoarse. "No one, Captain. I only spotted it tangled in the reeds." Jason nodded silently, lips pressed tight. Reynolds steadied them. "It's all right. We'll take full statements later." The forensic team worked carefully, collecting soil, water, and plant samples to compare later in the lab. Hours passed, the scene meticulously recorded, until finally the body was zipped into a black bag and loaded into an ambulance. At the Fairview Community Center, a temporary command post was established. Reynolds gathered his team. "This isn't just a body dump. This was calculated. Whoever did this tried to erase their crime," he said firmly. "Step 1, identify her. Without a name we have no trail." He turned to Mitchell. "Run fingerprints, DNA, everything. I want results fast." Then to his crime unit. "Check every missing persons report in Fairview, Akron, Dayton, Cincinnati. Middle-aged women first. Knock on doors if you have to." Daniel Brooks, a younger officer, asked, "What if she's from further away?" "Then trace the Hudson upstream and downstream," Reynolds ordered. "Question fishermen, sand diggers, anyone. Don't leave a single stone unturned." The room fell silent, each officer realizing the path ahead was long and full of shadows. Outside, villagers murmured non-stop, theories flying like sparks. Mr. Harris sat apart, head bowed, haunted. For him, the river he had trusted his whole life had betrayed him, returning not life but death. At the Ohio State Forensics Lab in Columbus, antiseptic stung the air as the swollen body, later identified as Linda Parker, was laid on the table. Her waterlogged state made the examination delicate, every movement precise. Detective Mitchell led the effort. "Document external trauma first. Every bruise, every abrasion," she instructed. Technicians photographed from all angles while others logged her mud-stained floral dress and plant fragments caught in the fabric. Mitchell studied the injuries again. Blunt trauma, forehead and jaw. She was alive before entering the river. No stab wounds. Cause of death, heavy blunt force impact. Meanwhile, fingerprint technicians struggled. "Captain, the fingertips are badly degraded from water exposure," Daniel muttered. Mitchell responded, calm but stern. "Reconstruct them. Lift the skin, treat it with chemicals, recast it. We need her prints no matter how long it takes." For 3 sleepless days the team labored. Finally, on August 28, 2021, digital results arrived. The victim, Linda Parker, born May 12, 1966, resident of Fairview, Ohio. Captain Reynolds received the report gravely. "This is it. We start with her family. They'll either give us answers, or show us who's hiding them." Lab tests added another layer. Water from the Hudson was found in her lungs. Proof she was alive when dumped. Proof of murder. At the community center, villagers wept quietly. Their once calm home was now a crime scene. Evidence was catalogued: ropes, clothing, mud, sack pieces, all sealed for further testing. Reynolds gave his next command. Tonight we visit the Parker family. Watch them carefully. Every glance, every hesitation could be a clue. The sun fell behind the trees, leaving Maplewood in uneasy silence. The Hudson now bore witness not to peace, but to secrets clawing their way to the surface. By nightfall, 2 police cars wound their way down narrow country roads. The headlights threw long, shifting shadows across Fairview. Reynolds leaned toward his team. Stay alert. Watch body language, listen for cracks in their stories, he reminded them. At 8:30 p.m. they knocked at the Parker residence. Robert Parker, the victim's husband, opened the door in plain clothes. "Evening, officers. Can I help you?" His voice was even, but his eyes blinked too quickly, nerves betraying him. "Good evening. Fairview Police," Reynolds said, flashing his badge. "We'd like to speak about Mrs. Linda Parker." Robert swallowed hard, then forced composure. "Of course. Please come inside." Inside, a young woman, Emily Parker, sat clutching her 4-year-old daughter, Chloe. The sight of the officers drained the color from her face. Her grip on the child tightened, the other hand twisting a rag in her lap. Her breathing grew shallow and uneven. Reynolds studied her carefully. The trembling, the glassy eyes, the quickening breaths, every detail was a signal. "Emily," he asked gently but firmly, "you're Linda Parker's daughter-in-law, correct?" Her head dropped. Yes, I am," she whispered, voice breaking. Eyes darted nervously toward little Chloe as Captain Mark Reynolds and his team guided the family into the living room. At first glance, everything appeared spotless, too spotless. The polished floor gleamed unnaturally, the furniture sat in precise order, and not a speck of dust lingered anywhere. Reynolds bent low, sweeping his ultraviolet flashlight across the corners. Suddenly, faint stains glowed back at him, marks that the naked eye might have missed. "Reynolds, Mrs. Emily Parker, when was the last time you saw Mrs. Linda?" Emily's eyes flickered toward her husband before she answered, her voice trembling. "Emily, last Friday. I remember seeing her in the kitchen that night." Robert Parker jumped in quickly. "Robert, we assumed she went to visit relatives in another town. We haven't heard from her since." Their words sounded rehearsed, too practiced. Reynolds studied them carefully. Emily's hand shook as she stroked Chloe's hair, her body radiating unease. Robert, by contrast, sat rigidly, fists clenched, shoulders tight with strain. "Reynolds, for now this home is sealed. No one touches a thing. The technical team will conduct a full sweep tomorrow morning." 2 officers moved methodically, marking doors and drawers, while Reynolds and a partner searched the living room under the beam of their lights. The room darkened, the ultraviolet revealing more. Faint stains trailing by the sofa, shards of glass tucked under a folded cloth. Reynolds, whispering to his assistant, these could be tied to her final moments. Emily's composure cracked. Her breathing quickened, her grip tightened around the fabric in her lap. Her shoulders quivered as her eyes filled with tears. Reynolds softened his tone, pressing just enough to unravel her defenses. "Reynolds, Emily Chloe is safe. We only need the truth about that night. Please help us understand." Emily looked at her daughter, then back at Reynolds, her body sagging as if weighed down by guilt. Her lips trembled, her tears threatening to spill. Every flicker of emotion was quietly documented by the team. Then Reynolds shifted his focus. "Reynolds, Mr. Parker will ask you the same. Honesty is in your favor. Every detail matters." Robert swallowed hard, staring at the floor before nodding stiffly. His voice was steady, but his fists remained clenched, betraying the tension burning through him. For long minutes, investigators observed in silence, tracking every blink, every shallow breath, every nervous twitch. Emily, on the verge of breaking, rocked Chloe against her chest, clutching the cloth as if it were a lifeline. Reynolds kept the pressure steady but careful, pushing without cornering. Outside, Mr. Harris and Jason Miller waited uneasily, listening to the muffled movements inside. They knew tonight had cracked open the first layer of a much darker truth. By 10 p.m., Reynolds called it for the night. The technical team had sealed the home, logged every stain, shard, and fabric scrap. Tomorrow the real forensic sweep would begin. Emily slumped weakly on the sofa, Chloe pressed tightly against her chest. Robert stayed tense, silent, his jaw rigid. "Reynolds, tomorrow morning we'll begin the formal investigation. Every object, every statement, every gesture becomes part of the record." Outside, the Hudson River flowed as calmly as ever, but inside the Parker household, shadows of hidden truths were beginning to emerge. Tonight's findings would steer the investigation toward its next critical phase. Morning broke over Fairview, the weak sunlight filtering through the Parker home. The air was damp, but heavier still was the unspoken tension that filled every corner. At 8 a.m., Reynolds and his team returned with full equipment. Cameras, ultraviolet lamps, evidence kits, and sealed bags. Reynolds paused outside, addressing his squad. "Reynolds, today we dig deeper. Every corner, every object could unlock the truth. Nothing escapes us." Inside, Emily sat pale, Chloe in her lap, her hands trembling. Robert leaned against the wall, chest rising and falling heavily. Reynolds studied them both as he spoke. "Reynolds, we'll be thorough today. Emily, remember, your daughter is safe. We just need honesty." The search began. With lights off and ultraviolet beams scanning the surfaces, more evidence revealed itself. Faint dried blood by the sofa, glass fragments half hidden under a cloth, and traces of blue and white fabric fibers. The same pattern as the sack used to hide Linda's body. Every item was photographed and carefully bagged. Reynolds turned his attention back to Robert. "Reynolds, Mr. Parker, every move and every item here is recorded. Cooperation is in your best interest." Robert stiffened, fists tightening once more. Then Reynolds addressed Emily directly. "Reynolds, Emily, the truth matters now more than ever. No one will harm Chloe. Tell us what happened." Emily lowered her head, her body trembling violently. Chloe clung to her hand, eyes wide and confused. Reynolds waited in silence, letting the weight of truth press down. Only the sound of birds outside and the soft creak of the window filled the tense air. Finally, Emily broke. "Emily, that night? I saw her in the kitchen. Robert was there too, and then, it all happened so fast." Her words spilled like cracks spreading through glass. The team recorded every detail. Reynolds signaled his technicians to move toward the kitchen. Under ultraviolet light, more blood traces were uncovered on the floor and doorknob, alongside fragments of blue and white cloth. This was the turning point. The evidence no longer whispered, it screamed. Robert and Emily Parker were now directly tied to Linda Parker's death. The verdict that shattered so many lives became a lesson carved into the memory of Maplewood and Fairview, an undeniable reminder that no crime stays hidden forever, and that justice will always find its way to the surface. Conversations in the community began shifting. Neighbors spoke openly about integrity, responsibility, and the strength of family bonds. Meetings at the Fairview Community Center focused on the importance of honest communication, moral guidance, and instilling values in the younger generation. The Hudson River, once a silent witness to the tragedy, now stood as a symbol. It reminded everyone that, however deeply secrets may be buried, the truth always rises. Schools and community groups began using the tragedy not as gossip, but as a collective lesson. Children were taught that respect for parents, honesty, and building healthy relationships are the true foundations of life. Adults reflected on the importance of protecting their families from destructive choices while upholding ethical values. Though sorrow weighed heavily over the town, an enduring message lingered. Betrayal and deceit carry consequences, but truth and integrity are the walls that protect future generations. Fairview itself grew more cautious, more protective, and more mindful of family values and the law. Every time David Parker watched Chloe play in the yard, he reminded himself of the importance of honesty and compassion. He wanted her to grow up free from fear, to understand that the mistakes of adults did not define her and that justice, though slow, always arrives. In her final letter before the appeal, Emily Parker wrote to her daughter. Emily voiceover. "My child, never forget, truth is the light that guides the way. The mistakes of adults may scar the present, but your future can still shine if you choose what is right." That letter served as the closing line of a painful chapter in Fairview. The Hudson River kept flowing, villagers moved forward with heavy but wiser hearts, and the tragedy became a universal warning. Forbidden relationships and lies can tear families apart, but honesty, courage, and integrity will always guide the next generation. A cold morning fell over Fairview days after the trial. The small town buzzed with whispers about the verdict. Children played in yards while adults traded news about Robert and Emily Parker's fate. The air felt tense even as life tried to resume. David rose early to prepare breakfast for Chloe, exhaustion etched on his face, yet determined to stay strong for his daughter. As Chloe played on the porch, David gazed toward the Hudson River. Its calm surface belied the storms of memory it held. Taking a deep breath, he promised himself that today would mark the start of a new routine for Chloe, one rooted in stability and love. At the community center, neighbors gathered to discuss the tragedy's impact. Some stressed the need for stronger family communication and moral education. A teacher, "We must ensure our children are not scarred by this, and that they don't repeat the mistakes of adults." Meanwhile, Robert Parker remained under medical care in the prison hospital. Frail and pale, he wrestled with the crushing realization that his reputation and life had been destroyed beyond repair. Every night, he relived the choices that ended Linda's life and pulled Emily into the spiral of tragedy. Emily too bore the weight of regret behind bars. She wrote letter after letter to Chloe, pouring out remorse and praying that her daughter would someday understand that, despite her mistakes, life must continue. Each word was an attempt at redemption, though no words could restore what was lost. Back in Fairview, residents began holding regular meetings, discussing how betrayal and dishonesty can wreck not only families but entire communities. Children were taught lessons about truth, respect, and choosing right over temptation. David often visited his mother's grave, carrying flowers and whispering promises. David, softly, "Mother, I'll protect Chloe. I'll make sure her life is not defined by our mistakes. I'll raise her in truth and compassion." At home, David tidied the house, reorganized Chloe's books and toys, and created a safe, warm environment. He knew trauma never disappears entirely, but steady love and structure could help his daughter heal. Neighbors expressed mixed feelings. Some felt relief that justice had been served, while others feared that such darkness could strike again. Meetings centered on building safer families and supporting those left behind after tragedy. That night, David stood by the window, listening to the river's steady current. Relief washed over him knowing the truth had been revealed, but he also understood the path to healing, for himself and for Chloe, would be long. The Hudson River, calm and unyielding, became both a reminder of what was lost and a promise of hope. The story stayed alive in conversations, retold as a warning and a moral guide for generations to come. One cold morning, David opened his window to see the river shimmering in the sun. Though the court had delivered justice, his heart remained unsettled. Chloe laughed in the yard, but David knew her scars would not fade quickly. Some neighbors offered sympathy, while others whispered and judged from a distance. The weight of community scrutiny pressed on David, but he resolved to protect Chloe's future with strength and integrity. In prison, Emily received brief visits from her lawyer and Dr. Amanda Lewis. She continued to write to Chloe, her hands trembling as she admitted her faults. Emily, voiceover from her letter. "My child, my mistakes are heavy. But I want you to grow strong, to grow honest." Her letters became a fragile bridge between mother and daughter, fragments of love carried through steel bars. At home, David built structure into Chloe's days. He organized her room, set routines, and read her stories filled with lessons about honesty, courage, and kindness. Slowly, Chloe began to grasp the meaning of integrity and respect. At another meeting in the community center, leaders emphasized vigilance, moral education, and stronger family ties. The tragedy had left its mark, and people wanted to ensure it would never repeat. Meanwhile, Robert wasted away in prison. Haunted, sleepless, he relived his betrayal every night, realizing that lust and lies had ruined him. His silence and regret were his only companions. David carried a different burden, the question of how to raise Chloe alone under the eyes of a watchful town. Every interaction became a test of his patience and moral resolve. One afternoon he took Chloe to the riverbank. They sat on a wooden bench watching the water. "David, my child, we cannot change what's behind us, but we can choose what lies ahead. Always be honest. Always respect your parents." Chloe looked at him with wide eyes, gripping his hand. That evening, David wrote in his journal, recording every effort he made to protect Chloe's heart. In time, the villagers began to see him not as a victim, but as a symbol of resilience. They realized that enduring sorrow with integrity was more powerful than letting bitterness take root. The Hudson River kept flowing, silently witnessing the slow healing of a broken family. Mist shrouded Fairview as another morning dawned. From the outside, the town appeared calm, but storms still raged in David's heart. Raising Chloe alone demanded not just strength, but constant patience. Since the verdict, neighbors looked at his home with mixed feelings: curiosity, sympathy, even suspicion. David knew his every action would set an example for Chloe. He vowed never to plant hatred in her heart. Meanwhile, whispers about Robert and Emily filled the air, spreading from porch to porch. David ignored the rumors, focusing only on Chloe's future. Robert, behind bars, grew weaker each day, haunted by endless nights of regret. Emily, too, continued sending letters to Chloe, trying to preserve their bond in words. David read them with conflicting emotions, anger, sorrow, but also understanding. Chloe still needed her mother's love, even in fragments. At school, teachers created special programs about honesty and moral strength. These lessons helped not only Chloe, but all children touched by the tragedy. One afternoon, David returned with Chloe to the same bench by the Hudson River. They watched the water flow, quiet and steady. "David, my child, we cannot rewrite the past, but we can build the future. Never let hatred take root. Hold on to honesty, it will guide you always." Chloe squeezed his hand, her innocence a fragile light in the shadows of their loss. "David, truth and courage will always be your shield." Chloe looked up at her father with innocent eyes, squeezing his hand tightly. David felt a flicker of hope returning to his daughter's heart. That night, David sat with his diary. He wrote down every moment that brought Chloe a smile, each small step he took to rebuild their lives and restore her sense of safety. His notes became reminders that even though tragedy had torn their family apart, the future could still be rebuilt, with love, resilience, and unshakable values. Meanwhile, in Maplewood and neighboring Fairview, residents began speaking openly about how to prevent such heartbreak from ever repeating. At the Fairview Community Center, Mr. Collins and local teachers gathered families to discuss the importance of open communication, early moral education, and community awareness. Children were encouraged to reflect on their actions and understand the weight of their choices. The discussions reminded everyone that while justice had been served in court, the emotional and social healing would take far longer. David and Chloe would now face not only private grief but also the pressures of public scrutiny, learning to hold fast to integrity while rebuilding their lives. Fairview, though scarred by the past, was reshaping itself into a village more watchful, more compassionate, and more committed to moral responsibility. The Hudson River flowed steadily nearby, a symbol of time and consequence, a reminder that every act leaves its mark. The next morning dawned bright in Fairview. David crossed his small yard, watching Chloe play with her favorite toys. Relief washed over him that justice had been achieved, but sorrow lingered in the shadows of their home. Neighbors came with warm smiles, food, and helping hands. Yet behind their kindness was the quiet weight of curiosity, unspoken questions about the Parker family's tragedy. David received their gestures with polite gratitude, knowing well that society's gaze would always remain. Meanwhile, in prison, Robert Parker's strength eroded. Each night he was tormented by the same nightmare, the night that destroyed everything. His once commanding presence was now frail, his face pale with regret. He realized that greed, deceit, and selfish desires had shattered not only his own life but his family's name. Regret consumed every waking hour behind those cold walls. Emily Parker, from her separate cell, poured her soul into letters for Chloe. In trembling handwriting, she offered not only apologies but words of advice and encouragement. Emily, in her letter: "My child, even though I have made grave mistakes, your life can still be bright if you choose the right path. Don't let the failures of adults weigh down your future." David read the letter with Chloe by his side. They both felt torn between grief, compassion, and the faint spark of forgiveness. At school, teachers gathered small circles of children, including Chloe, to discuss honesty, responsibility, and bravery. These conversations helped the children learn that adults' mistakes do not have to define them. Chloe began to absorb the lesson, holding her father's hand tighter and smiling softly when teachers read stories of moral courage. One afternoon, David led Chloe to the Hudson River. They sat on a wooden bench, watching the calm current flow endlessly. David gently: "My child, this river keeps moving forward just like our lives. The past cannot be changed, but we can shape tomorrow. Always be truthful, respect others, and never repeat the mistakes adults once made." Chloe looked at him with pure eyes, squeezed his hand, and nodded. Passers-by from the village noticed them and felt moved by David's quiet strength in raising his daughter through such pain. In time, gossip and whispers gave way to respect. That night, David returned to his diary. He wrote about Chloe's faint smile, his steps toward rebuilding her trust, and his reflections on the heavy cost of human weakness. Each word became a reminder that healing required not only time, but resilience and love. Meanwhile, the community continued its own efforts. Mr. Collins and the teachers reminded families that strong communication, early moral guidance, and community vigilance were essential to preventing another tragedy. Children were urged to recognize the consequences of their choices. Adults were urged to shoulder their role as guides for the younger generation. The lesson was clear. While the law had rendered its judgment, emotional and social recovery was still ongoing. David and Chloe had to endure social pressure, rebuild fragile trust, and hold tightly to the moral compass guiding their future. Fairview too was learning, understanding that tragedy, while painful, could become a powerful teacher when faced with integrity and perseverance. The Hudson River moved silently along, bearing witness to their journey, from brokenness and regret to lessons and renewal. David gazed at Chloe with fresh hope. He realized her future could still shine if it was built upon resilience, love, and lessons drawn from the pain of the past. This chapter closed not with finality, but with reflection, an acknowledgement that truth, integrity, and responsibility are foundations no one can escape. Every action carries consequences. Another bright morning touched Fairview. Inside his modest home, David knew peace was only an appearance. He and Chloe now had to face a reality without Linda, without the anchor that once held their family together. Watching Chloe play, David hid his sorrow. Neighbors, though still whispering, now showed genuine support, bringing food, tidying his yard, or simply keeping him company. David greeted them with weary kindness, knowing that every word and action he chose would shape Chloe's future. Meanwhile, Robert endured the crushing weight of prison life. His health deteriorated, his sharp eyes dulled by regret. He realized his lust for power and betrayal had cost him not only freedom but his family's honor. Nights were haunted by remorse he could never escape. Emily, confined far away, continued writing to Chloe, letters filled with sorrow but also encouragement. David read them aloud with Chloe, torn between anger and understanding. He knew Chloe still needed her mother's words, even if they came from behind prison walls. That evening, David once again brought Chloe to the Hudson River. They sat quietly watching the water glide past. "David, my child, this river flows forever. We cannot change yesterday, but we can shape tomorrow. Always hold on to honesty, respect, and never repeat the mistakes that hurt so many." Chloe met his gaze with gentle eyes, squeezed his hand, and smiled faintly. David felt hope begin to return in her small heart. Villagers nearby watched silently, touched by his perseverance. Little by little, curiosity gave way to admiration, for a father determined to raise his daughter with strength and integrity, even in the shadow of tragedy. The village of Fairview slowly realized that truth, courage, and responsibility are not values meant only for a courtroom, but for daily life. That evening, David Parker opened his diary. He recorded the little moments that mattered most: Chloe's rare smiles, her gentle interactions with neighbors, and the steady efforts he made to rebuild not just their home, but her fragile sense of safety. Those notes became his reminder that healing is not instant. It takes patience, resilience, and unwavering love. At school, teachers continued holding lessons on ethics and responsibility. Though still a child, Chloe began to grasp the meaning of honesty and bravery. She was learning that the failures of adults were not her fate, and that every child has the power to choose the right path. This chapter of the story showed how nearly everyone was beginning to accept reality. Reflection replaced denial, and social pressure gradually shifted into genuine support. David began to believe that although the journey of recovery would be long, Chloe's future could remain bright, so long as it was built on love, integrity, and the hard lessons of the past. The Hudson River flowed calmly nearby, silently bearing witness to this family's journey, from wounds and sorrow to lessons and quiet healing. David looked at his daughter with resolve. He realized that even tragedy could become a teacher, if faced with determination, courage, and integrity. The morning sun rose over Fairview, casting warm light across the rooftops. Yet David's heart still carried its weight. On the porch, Chloe played with her toys. Her childhood, once meant to be full of laughter, was now shadowed by loss. David inhaled deeply, steadying himself before teaching her how to face this new reality. Neighbors came by with food and small gestures of kindness. Their looks carried both sympathy and curiosity. Some whispered quietly, wondering how a young father could withstand such immense pressure. David understood that every step he took not only shaped Chloe's future, but also served as an example for the community, that honesty, courage, and moral responsibility were the only path to recovery. Meanwhile, Robert Parker endured long days inside his prison cell, consumed by restless reflection. Each night, nightmares of that fateful evening tormented him. His once commanding presence had weakened. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. He finally admitted to himself that lust and lies had not only destroyed his reputation, but shattered his family as well. Loneliness and regret became his constant companions, reminders that no one escapes the weight of their choices. Emily Parker, locked away in another facility, poured her emotions into letters for Chloe. Her words were filled not only with apologies, but with guidance and advice, pleas for her daughter to grow into a strong and honest young woman. David read the letters aloud with Chloe. The emotions they stirred were complex: sadness, regret, but also understanding. They both realized that Chloe's future could still shine, if it was nurtured by love and moral clarity. That afternoon, David took Chloe to the banks of the Hudson River. They sat together on a weathered wooden bench, watching the steady current. David softly, "My child, this river flows without end, just like life. We cannot undo the past, but we can choose our tomorrow. Always be honest, respect those who love you, and never repeat the mistakes of adults." Chloe gazed at her father with pure eyes, gripping his hand tightly before smiling faintly. In that moment, David felt a fragile hope returning in her heart. Neighbors passing by the river noticed them, touched by David's strength in guiding his daughter through such pain. Slowly, gossip gave way to respect, and the village began turning its focus from judgment to the importance of moral integrity. That night, David returned to his diary once more. He wrote about Chloe's smiles, their conversations with neighbors, and his own reflections on restoring her sense of security. Each note reminded him that healing was a journey, a long path requiring resilience, time, and steady love. At school, Chloe's teachers continued emphasizing the values of honesty and bravery. Children were reminded that the mistakes of adults did not have to define their lives. Integrity, they were told, was the best shield against life's hardships. Chloe absorbed these lessons slowly, showing small signs of newfound strength in her words and actions. Months after the tragedy, Fairview returned to its routines. Yet for those most affected, the shadow remained. The Hudson River flowed quietly as though carrying away the dark memories, but the villagers never forgot what they had learned. David now focused on Chloe's future. Each morning he cooked breakfast, studied with her, and played in the yard. He wanted her to grow in safety and love, guided by honesty, courage, and responsibility. The bitter past would remain a lesson, not a curse. Emily, still behind bars, continued writing letters filled with sorrow and wisdom. David read them aloud to Chloe, holding her close. He reminded her that though adult mistakes could destroy the present, the future was theirs to rebuild. Robert, in prison, endured endless days of regret. His nights were haunted by nightmares, his health fading under the weight of remorse. He accepted at last that lust and lies had destroyed not only his freedom, but the trust of those who once loved him. Loneliness became his punishment, an eternal reminder that every action carries consequences. Meanwhile, the people of Fairview began treating the tragedy as a moral lesson. Mr. Collins and the teachers organized gatherings on the importance of family communication, social responsibility, and early moral education. Children were taught to think about the consequences of their actions, while adults were reminded of their duty to guide the young. Every time David watched Chloe play, he reminded her of honesty and bravery. He wanted her to understand that her life would not be defined by the mistakes of adults. The Hudson River, once a silent witness to tragedy, now stood as a symbol of renewal and hope. This story showed that sin and betrayal may destroy lives, but truth, love, and integrity can rebuild them. Fairview, though scarred, became a village more caring, more vigilant, and more respectful of family values. The epilogue closes with reflection. Tragedy can be transformed into a lesson, proving that legal justice and moral justice must walk hand in hand. The next generation can grow stronger if raised with love, honesty, and responsibility. On the riverbank, David embraced Chloe as the morning breeze swept gently around them. He looked at the calm water and smiled, realizing that although the past was heavy with pain, his daughter's future still held promise. The river kept flowing like life itself, carrying mistakes, teaching lessons, and offering the chance to step forward into tomorrow with wiser, more hopeful hearts. The final message to the villagers, and to all who hear this story: cherish family, guard your integrity, build life on honesty. Adult mistakes may shatter the present, but resilience and truth will always guide the next generation toward a brighter future.